Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Well, hello. It is the middle of January 2023. What were we doing last year? Other than trying to stay warm.
I feel like it was about the same temperature and then it goes into the February freeze.
Yeah, everything seems like it's right on track. Other than the weird shifts between really cold and then 2 days later it's like 60 degrees and humid.
I think it did that even last year too.
I know it did too.
And like the past few years it's been doing that. Well, even I remember as far back as like
2016, 2015.
Yeah, 2015, 2016 even, getting these like January 60 day.
You know, I know that climate change itself is a continuum, but I'm pretty sure the climate has absolutely changed at this point. Like, I know that we still have like our traditional
most definitely
seasons, but like, I'm not actually complaining. I don't actually mind.
I mean, it's not bad that it's only 40. Like the high today is 45 and the low is 34. That's not
bad at all.
Existentially bad to be in.
There's less crap all over the roads too this year. But at this point, I remember there was at least salt and sand on the road in places. That or they've figured out a way to salt the roads without it becoming like horrible. The roads don't seem that bad yet. Granted, we haven't had like monumental snow yet where there should be reason to really put it on there. But we did have that blizzard. That blizzard happened like twice in a week.
Well, we haven't had much ice yet, though. Like,
yeah, it just hasn't had a chance to really form.
I feel like the ground hasn't gotten that cold, or we've had enough fluctuation that the ground hasn't really had the chance to freeze.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting when February happens because the water or the ground seems so saturated with water. Like it's just ready to turn into like almost mud. I bet when it does finally freeze, it's going to be really like the hardest of hardest February soil. It's kind of strange though because part of me expects it to be colder.
Yeah, it feels like it should be colder right now, but I think we're gonna get that in February in the sense of like the flux has been, as far as I can tell, it's like this fake out January warm front, and then it goes way back into the frost before spring.
Well, there's also the whole like the atmospheric rivers that have been pounding California for the past several weeks now. I remember early on they were saying that the ground was so dry that the water was just rushing over and wasn't even being absorbed. And now the reservoirs are filling, and it appears that they might help with the drought, at least for the coming season. But it's interesting because that means there's so much water in the atmosphere. It's got to come down at some point, right? So it's got to end up on the ground somewhere because it can't stay up there forever. It just seems like there's a lot more water in the atmosphere than normal.
I mean, that's definitely what it feels like in the sense of it feels like an abnormally humid winter.
Yeah. I think
it's usually drier than this.
Yeah, normally at this point, my sinuses are kind of starting to complain because it's dry enough regularly that.
Right, and bloody and like
But
cracked.
that's not
And
happening this year.
yeah.
Totally not complaining about that for sure. I never would have thought of Indiana as a wet winter climate, but I've always thought of like the Pacific Northwest as the wet, wet winter climate. But if this is like a sign of things to come, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I can deal with a little bit more mud and less like completely solid frozen.
Yeah, and in that, I think just, well, I don't know. It doesn't really seem to last much longer than February, but it don't. And then February doesn't really get a full chance to freeze over either. It's like it gets cold, but still not enough time for the ground to actually start freezing and shit. Um, Maybe like the topsoil, but not actually like underneath, because I think that temperature change is like easy to assume that it goes like into the earth, but even with like large bodies of water too,
Oh yeah.
it takes a long time to change.
Oh, I don't think that the temperature change can only penetrate the earth. The temperature can only penetrate the ground so far, but I think it has to be sustained long enough. I mean, if it only gets down to like -20 for a day, that's cold. But if it stays at like 20 degrees for a week, that's actually really cold. Like if the average temperature is sustained for that long, that's like, I think that's the thing that's not happening. For the past several years, I've noticed that every year we get lots and lots of insects, lots of bugs, and I remember at one point, I can't remember who mentioned it. Like we had to get a really really long lasting solid cold snap to make sure that bugs got killed off.
I was seeing mosquitoes into December,
Yeah,
which was not cool. They finally really stopped, but yeah, I was definitely seeing them into December.
we saw a bee flying around yesterday.
Wow, I'm not surprised,
It's
but
a stupid bee.
that's pretty crazy. Yeah, woke up early.
Yeah,
I try to take my signals from the chipmunks, and they definitely haven't come out yet. So.
yeah. I still see some squirrels, but
Oh yeah, the squirrels are out every day.
that's their job. They've got to like remind you that they're gonna dig up the yard. Like, hey, I buried something around here. I can't find it though. I'm gonna be out here for a while though.
Crows and the woodpeckers and the sparrows and the doves are still pretty much every day. Um, it's interesting to see like the winter crew versus what this is basically the warm weather months crew.
Yeah, I used to, for a while I used to worry about like cardinals, but then it occurred to me that I see those suckers out in like the brightest snow-covered winter wonderland. They're like sitting there in the middle of a tree, just hanging out.
Yeah, they're out pretty much every day too, and the bluebirds or blue jays rather.
Yeah, those things seem pretty tough.
Bluebirds, for juncos, tufted titmouse. I haven't seen that one for a while actually. But yeah, it's funny to see like some animals don't need electricity to be able to survive the same winter as us. It's really funny. Like, yeah, they understand insulation and heat and all that. Don't need like HVAC installation.
Well, I know that there's a couple of like groundhogs that live kind of near me, and they're going to come out in spring looking all raggedy like they just woke up, haven't seen sunlight in months. For a while, I was really keen on trying to trap them because I thought they were destroying my garden. But one day I noticed one just in the yard eating clover and just being real chill. Had zero interest in the garden. You know, had full access to tomatoes and cucumbers and squash, just didn't care. And then I realized, hey, I don't need to mess with these guys. They're not the problem. They're like goats, but I don't have to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
Keep the yard trimmed down. It's awesome.
Yeah, so most stuff is really low maintenance if you just like get out of its way.
Well, you know, deer like to eat the tomato plants. I don't think they eat the tomatoes. They eat the plants for a while. They definitely eat the squash.
Yeah, they definitely will. They eat some flowers here, and it's like, man, you never know when they'll show up and just ruin your shit. It's like, you can't really be too mad at them. It's like, man, that shit sucks because it definitely happens frequently.
Yeah, it's like they are the locust of biblical legend on a very small scale. Like they come in the night and just devour everything, and then they leave. And then you go out there, and it's like, what the fuck just happened to everything? And it's all like waist to chest height, too. Everything else is spared. Bastards.
Yeah, you can totally see based on the height. That's a dead giveaway.
But, you know, I think it's actually like a good sign, you know, that they'll come through and do that kind of thing, because that means that the environments that we keep are inviting and feel safe, and it might as well be, I mean, to them it's a smorgasbord, but it meets those other requirements. So, you know, there's like a Venn diagram of overlap where humans and deer coexist at different times of the day. Actually, I'm pretty sure they coexist at all times of the day in the city, like in town.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, you'll see them in town at all times of day. It's really crazy.
Yeah, they're not maintaining their corpuscular circadian rhythm. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're active at night, but I see deer in town just wandering through.
Well, I mean, it's like you'll see them during the day, but when they're at night, it's like way more.
Yeah.
One time it was like in the middle of the city. It was like 10 p.m. maybe, or 11. I saw probably 8 or 9 of them, which is like the most I've ever seen in a group at once.
I've seen that many like out in the wilderness.
Right. I mean,
like across a field.
It's about the most I've ever seen that close, because it was like they ran across the road as a group, and it's like they were clearly moving as a unit. Like I had time to stop and take, you know, it's on my YouTube page and shit. Like it's, you know, it was enough to pull over and take a video, but that's where I'm like, I've never seen that many in the city during the day. Like the most I've seen during the day together is probably 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And if it's like 3, it's usually like a mom and the kids. Like, a couple kids.
Well,
But
it's
never that many during the day.
it's interesting to me. Like, there's a lot of effort placed in like urban development and traffic management, and it seems that the more we expand, the more we invite members of the local fauna community to interact. I was reading about how in a lot of the like the Rocky Mountain cities or cities that are along the Rockies, it's really common for people to see game animals just wandering through the streets. I think the other day I was reading about how not too long ago a woman on a bicycle tour was attacked by a bear, and she had set up camp like right next to the city's museum, so in town. And then it's not uncommon in like Montana for people to have elk encounters, and it's like the more people want to expand. We can't just drive them off. There's a whole ecological balance that exists that we can't just completely undo. Obviously, they return. I mean, I suppose we could. As I understand it, white-tailed deer were almost eradicated, and they had to reintroduce them to various regions to get them to not go extinct in North America.
Well, and then I think they created then the opposite problem, where in some areas they're overpopulated.
Yeah.
Which is, yet another reason we don't really have any business trying to control nature.
Well, it's interesting. Like, there are states that try to keep track of their deer populations, and Indiana is one where like the deer population is generally unknown. They can say, yeah, there are 2 million deer in Indiana, but last year it was they even with all of the reporting of deer, like there are just too many, and they can't track them all. The woods are so dense. And I think like all of the Midwestern states have that problem where the woods are just so dense. It's like you can mathematically extrapolate a range of deer that could exist in that area. And that's probably as close as they can actually get. Also, the idea of keeping track of wild animal populations is really amusing to me. Like, if someone's out there taking census, hey, come back here. I need you to answer some questions.
Well, and there's like, some animals that even professional photographers take decades to get pictures of, let alone
Oh yeah.
If what the giant squid was thought to be a myth until we finally got a fucking image of it.
Man, I was looking at big lenses and some like telescope type stuff. And next thing you know, YouTube was showing me this guy that looked like he was getting ready to go do airsoft, but he wasn't. He was just wearing like all of the tactical camouflage stuff to go take pictures, like blend into the hillside type stuff. Build a ghillie suit on site so that it could hide and take better pictures of woodland fauna, which I think is super cool. That's like the kind of woodland shooting that can happen year round. And people might never know that photographer is out there.
Well, and then you see...
That's like super candid photography.
There's a lot of wildlife migration through this corridor. So it is like you'll see photographers going through that type of trouble to get a picture because it's like there's enough fauna that it's actually worth it.
Yeah.
At least like migratory or transitory. And it's like you can end up seeing some crazy shit like bears or
you just got to sit completely still long enough. No cell phones.
Crazy eagles. I see bald eagles all the time. I mean, not all the time, but relatively.
I think that there's some bald eagle nesting around the northern portion of Lake Monroe.
Yeah, and out towards like Old 37.
Yeah.
On the north side of town. They definitely hunt out there because I've seen them in like just in the fields.
Just chilling out in the middle of a field.
Well, it looked like they were getting a kill or something. It's like they were definitely on the ground. That shit's unmistakable with their white heads.
Yeah.
Well, and they're fucking huge too.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's like turkeys and
which
vultures
are turkeys are large birds too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to think to see one out in a wild turkey and think, oh, that's not that big, because we're used to seeing like Thanksgiving turkeys that have been plucked and are gigantic because they're fed farm diet, which is way less way more consistent than free range turkey diet. Not even free range, wild turkey diet. They're still pretty damn big for birds. I've seen quite a few geese too in the last couple of weeks. And I don't get out much, but geese are pretty damn big too.
Yeah, and they're pretty mean.
So apparently
territorial.
Apparently, in the last decade or so, it's been so warm up north, like in Canada, that snow geese have been experiencing extended breeding seasons, and they're overpopulating and eating too much food. Basically, they're stripping their resources. There's actually a snow goose problem.
I mean, they're douchey, man. I don't like those fuck them.
Hey, if there's a potential source of flying steaks that that are kind of problematic and can taste really good, like a flying steak if prepared properly, and we don't have to create an entire industry to harvest them. It already exists. Hey, I'm cool with that. I mean, a flying steak that practically delivers itself to you.
Come hunt you down, and it's just self-defense at that point.
Yeah, you just gotta piss it off. It'll come your way anyways.
Oh man, yeah, I've seen too many people test geese and
Oh god,
have the geese snap back at them, which is like, nah, man. I definitely would, unless I had some sort of weapon handy.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
goose, man.
You really have to have something. Like a tennis racket at the very least,
because they just are too comfortable coming after humans.
Their tongues are serrated. Fuck.
Yeah, they'll definitely hurt. They'll fuck you up, man. They bite hard too. Just
Yeah. It's crazy. They're like very well equipped. We don't think of them as like, predators or as they're not falcons. They're not birds of prey. They're not sitting out there trying to actively. Well, they might kill a fish. I'm pretty sure that most geese just eat like grass or pond, whatever that goop that grows in ponds. I'm sure there's a variation of a goose out there that eats fish. I'm sure, but yeah, you wouldn't think that they'd be so deadly or dangerous. Except without YouTube and limited anecdotal experience, but without YouTube, I would never have thought that geese are as vicious as they are, or can be. I wonder what kind of terrifying dinosaur they were.
Well, and I think that's why people approach them. It's like they don't look like they're gonna be that, have the affectation that they do. And then you're like, oh shit, I'm too close to this thing.
Man, it just occurred to me there might actually be a reason why there's no goose-style kung fu. It might have been too dangerous to translate from an animal form. Like, everyone who tried got killed by the goose. Or it's just flat out too aggressive. I don't know what kind of dinosaur that geese come from.
There's crane.
That's true. I don't think...
Which is like, it's not obviously the same animal, but...
It's kind of... It's
very
like,
similar.
Yeah, it's like goose adjacent. Maybe goose technique is like a weapon.
A crane is a more gigantic version of the goose, if we're gonna be on that spectrum anyway. Man, cranes are like, when you see them in person.
Oh yeah,
and they're like standing on top of a building, fucking 5 feet tall, looking at you like they're people, and they're like questioning your existence. It's really fucked up.
And they have a sword.
Yeah. They look like what's the word? Not really. It's like, they're physically there, but they get this like almost ethereal feeling of something watching you that's like as big as you are, if not bigger in some cases, where it's like you don't feel right looking at them, looking at you.
I bet they experience reality like on a factor of like 3 or 4 times faster than we do. Like their scale of time, like the perception of time, we're just slowly ambling about, just like all day long to them. And then they're like hummingbirds, where it's like not just their reference for existence is like an order of magnitude faster than ours.
Yeah, they can fly up to like 35 miles an hour. Or sometimes more, I guess.
And birds are just impressive. Super impressive. Like their physical structure, their bones are hollow so that they can like, exist they can fly. Like their bones aren't encumbered by the atmosphere. They like the density of their bones isn't like so much that they're weighed down by the atmosphere itself. It's so crazy. Human bones are just too dense for flight.
I don't think it's the bone density so much as their surface area.
Yeah, that too.
Um,
Oh, I'm just impressed like at
bird
how
bones are denser than mammal bones apparently. Like there's hollow like
they're hollow,
mammal
but they have more of the hard stuff,
mammal bones are like
full of goo.
porous. So it's not that they're um like the density is not necessarily defined by uh a
Oh
single
yeah, no,
cross
no, no.
section
Like
or like
uh, mammalian bone density is like it's actually quite low in terms of like the really hard portion of the bone. Like most mammal bones is actually like a spongy material, like you were saying, and then like an active matrix of bone marrow. But like birds, they've got this like crazy structure of like I don't know, I'm not stalactite dendrites that cross through the hollow portion of the center of it to give it like extra structure. It's really incredible looking stuff. They're stronger but lighter for a given like size of bone. And then their hands turn into freaking long ass wings. I think that stuff's incredible. Like for all the similarities that we have in terms of skeletons, there can be so many differences, and they're all like super specialized.
yeah, for sure. Which then, that's where the uh sugar glider suit variation allows us to do the same type of gliding maneuvers without actually modifying our bone density.
Oof.
Um, yeah, it is. It's funny to see like the sugar glider being closer to how an individual would be able to glide rather than try to mimic the bird uh, as an individual, like the what's it called? The hang glider. The hang glider is like, I guess, closer to a bird than a sugar glider in terms of like the wingspan. Well, I guess they're not always the same shape. A lot of them are broad, but I think they have some narrow ones. But uh, again, like knowing that the wingsuit isn't actually wings, more so like uh, a sugar glider's flaps. It's like our weight distribution is such that
I mean, like I think it's something like a third of a bird's weight is in its breast. So I weigh like 150 pounds. Imagine I'm trying to imagine if I had 50 pounds of pectoral muscles.
right. I think they did a comparison, and it would be like way bigger than the biggest bodybuilder by like a factor of 4 or something. It's just so disproportionate. I mean, compared to a human.
Yeah, like they have no calf musculature, but their thighs are gigantic. Their wings are pretty strong, but their breasts are like gargantuan. They have no butt. Incredible spinal musculature, like unbelievably super developed spinal musculature. Be the weirdest looking human. Bird hands and giant.
It would be more disproportionate than Johnny Bravo.
Yeah.
and even it's like the biggest bodybuilders, just their proportions compared to their strength, it's like we're just not even near the strength scale of birth. It's really crazy. Or as far as that specific muscle group.
Yeah. I don't think that humans could ever develop like that. It just wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to walk right. We'd have to develop a tail to counterbalance so we could walk. Our hips would have to be completely different. Our backs would have to be completely different to be able to support that kind of musculature. Everything we'd be more bird-like.
I mean, like a gorilla, basically. Yeah, it's like shorter legs, longer arms, more of a knuckle-dependent walk. That the upper body would like be a pendulum through which you
have to hold your hands behind your back so you could counterbalance to stand upright all the time.
No, we wouldn't stand upright.
No, I know.
We'd be like leaning forward in the sense of, I think that's where like, we see in the gorilla what that would look like in the sense of just an absolute monstrous upper body. In that it's like, the gorillas, it's not that the lower body's weak, it's just the upper body's just disproportionately larger in terms of like, well, I guess it's proportionate for them, but if we're looking at compared to like an upright human, it then looks like they have short legs and long arms. But it's only if you make that comparison to a human. Because then if you look at like the people who have disproportionately longer arms than they should for their height, they don't look like gorillas, but it's because they're not carrying like a proportionate amount of muscle to then actually start to weigh them down. So it's like the arms are long, but their muscles aren't like 4 times as big. And it looks like in a lot of cases it might be more difficult for them to put on muscle.
Because they've got a smaller torso and longer limbs. So they have more energy requirements to move those long limbs. And they've got a torso for a smaller package. That being said, I've seen some tiny people pack away a lot of food, so maybe my theory doesn't hold water.
Well, metabolism is so variable in terms of like those tiny people will be able to pack away a lot of food until they like turn 30 and then they can't do it at all anymore.
Yeah.
And they'll think that they can, but they can't. It's like around 25, I think it starts, and then it really picks up around 30, and then like for most people, everybody, it doesn't happen at that rate for everybody, but it's like
no, it was by my middle 30s is when I started to not be able to consume as much dairy as I wanted. And by the time I was around that same time is when I started to not be able to eat as much pizza as I wanted. But not because but that was more of the sauce than the cheese. There's less cheese.
When I was a teenager, I could eat a whole DiGiorno and still be hungry, but like you can't do that by the time you're 25.
Oh,
it's
hell
like
no.
you just can't. In terms of you physically could, but you're gonna feel like shit, and like your body just doesn't burn through it at the same rate in the way that. Then you're like, oh, I can eat a half DiGiorno at 20, and then by the time you're 30, it's like 35. Oh, maybe a slice, a third, and then by the time you're 40, it's like I can't eat any pizza.
It's like, oh, just the smell of it. No, I can still eat.
It's like I gained 5 pounds smelling a pizza. But it's just like if I eat a pizza now, my intestines and my weight is fucked up for like 3 or 4 days before it gets back to normal.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm not eating a whole pizza, you know, but that's because I can't. And even if I could, without the weight gain, it would still fuck up my stomach in a way where you're like, I don't think it was doing that when I was a kid, but you don't really care. So it's like you just power through stuff. Whereas like when you're an adult, you realize like, oh, this stomach inflammation is not sustainable, and you're like, oh, I can tell my stomach is inflamed when I eat this versus not a whole bunch of grains and cheese at the same time. But it's also like as much cheese as is on a slice of pizza, if somebody was just like, hey, here's
a handful of cheese,
like 22 ounces of cheese. Here, just eat 22 ounces of cheese. Nobody would fucking in their right mind just like, by the time that 22 ounces is a lot of cheese just on its own. By the time that's done, it's going to taste like fucking chalk. Like in the sense of, because there's this other, it's not always tomato sauce, but there's some citric acid, there's some grain in addition to that 22 ounces or 40 ounces or whatever, how many ounces of, or in some cases, pounds of cheese that you're eating in one sitting. Like if somebody was like, here's a 1 pound block of cheese, this is your dinner, it would be fucking gross just in any other context. But put that 1 pound of cheese on some bread, suddenly not so bad. Add some tomato sauce. Then now it's like, but it's still a pound of fucking cheese. And I think it's like really, really easy to end up in these mindsets where, because of the individual meal or the individual institution in the form of the restaurant, it's not like considering itself in terms of a continuous life. It's only a pizza. This is your dinner. This is your lunch or whatever. But when people do that thing repeatedly, frequently, it's like, oh, here's your pound of cheese for this week, or here's your pound of cheese for Tuesday. You're going to get another pound of cheese on Thursday. Now I'm going to get 2 pounds of cheese a week and eat 2 pounds of cheese a week at a time. It's not that people are lactose intolerant. It's that we shouldn't be eating fucking 2 pounds of cheese at a time.
104 pounds of cheese a year, baby.
Right, yeah. I mean, is that what the average is?
I don't know, but that's what 2 pounds of cheese a week turns into.
Because I'm sure they got stats in terms of like, I feel like I was probably being conservative in how much cheese Americans eat per week.
Let's see, domestic consumption.
What? No fucking way. No
Wait, hold
fucking way.
I'm seeing anywhere.
Oh my God.
37
no
pounds.
Fucking way. Yeah, that's about mine. I was seeing 39 and 40. No fucking way.
Let's just call it 40 pounds. 40 pounds of cheese a year.
Oh my God. Yeah, you don't have to be lactose intolerant if you're eating 40 pounds of cheese a year, and you're gonna feel fucked up. What? Average American eats 630 pounds of milk, yogurt, cheese, and ice cream per year. The 31 pounds of cheese alone, or whatever, 30 to 40, is just part of a 630-pound dairy per year per American. That's wild.
Oh.
That's fucking an insane amount of dairy products. And it's like, I love cheese. It's like not that much though, to the point that I don't want to hurt myself over something that if I didn't do as much, I'd be able to enjoy more of it longer. Like cutting back on cheese only makes me able to enjoy cheese more. Knowing how much, it's like, I can only imagine if most of this food isn't being consumed by growing children, then most of this consumption is just pure mindless, needless consumption, because it's not like people are going out and like Michael Phelpsing with this cheese consumption. It's like, I know, there's a lot of people who have blue collar jobs, definitely a lot of people, but a lot of them even will start their day with like 1,500 calories out the gate, where you're like, you're going to do 1,500 calories for breakfast and then do 1,500, 2,000 more at lunch and then do another 2,000 at dinner, but you only burn 4,000 that day. Yeah, you burned 4,000, but you consumed 6,000. And it's like,
hey man, you're asking people to do math.
Can't
do math when you're hungry.
When they started putting calories on shit, and then you start realizing like, oh, if I've been eating a bowl of cereal, I've actually been eating 2.5 servings, or like maybe closer to 3 instead of the 1. And then you see how many calories is in 1 serving. And then you realize that like most Americans are being served 3 times what they need per meal and consuming it because they've gotten used to it, and they're not burning 3 times more calories.
If I were to eat some like honey bunches of oats, just the actual single serving size, I would feel like I needed to eat more of something else. And if I were to try to eat enough of a bowl, like let's just do Cheerios, for example. If I were to eat enough Cheerios to feel like satisfied, like, yeah, I don't need anything else, I can go do whatever, I'm going to regret it in about 2 hours. But I will also have eaten close to a quarter of the box. Maybe more. Because it's easy to pack away cereal and not realize how full you are. Cereal's a really like simple example. Same thing. It's the same situation with oatmeal or malto meal or cream of wheat or grits or any of the old timey breakfast stuffs, hot breakfasts. It's really easy to fill up on those and have a lot of like raw energy. But it's also crazy to realize, like, once you're full of grits, that's like 8 servings to fill up, or like.
And here's the thing, so like it's really funny to phrase it that way in terms of like when you're full, because our body is like a terrible signal for actually letting us know when we should stop or when we should start eating. The fucking signals are always late. And then in terms of like when you should have already started to like ingesting nutrients to prevent a crash. And then when you actually start eating, the signals for when you're past how much you should have consumed, those are late. So like actually depending on your own body's signals for determining when you should start and stop eating is only going to set people up for failure. Literally, it's only going to set people up for failure. And it's fucked up, but that's why we can't depend on our bodies. Like our bodies are always going to fucking let us down in terms of like letting us know when we should eat and letting us know when we should stop eating. It's really fucking. This is why I don't believe in intelligent design. It's shit like that where I don't believe in intelligent design. Because I'm like, I know personally, every time I have a meal, I have to stop and give myself time, be like, oh, am I actually full or not? 10 minutes go by. No, I'm still hungry. Another 10 minutes go by. No, I'm not actually hungry. 10 minutes come back. No, I'm hungry again. What the fuck is it? What the fuck is it, stomach? Let me know. But it can't decide. It can't fucking decide. So it's like, the notion of like listening to your stomach in terms of the signal for when you can't eat is almost guaranteed to set people up for failure in terms of like keeping control of their eating schedule.
I have a similar threshold issue where it's like I don't feel the need to urinate until it's like time, and then it's like, oh crap, I gotta find a restroom. And it's strange because it's like I can sit in a car for hours and not need to go, but in that moment where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, buddy, I'm full, and it's like, bladder, why didn't you say something sooner? Like that's actually happened numerous times for me. It's similar with food though, but with food I think I can usually like convince myself that I don't need to eat anything if I just drink some water. Like a lot of times that
usually turns off the hunger signals for 9 out of 10 people.
Yeah.
Is just drinking water or
just getting some fluid.
Because the mastication process signals eating. So like it doesn't work every time, but like most of the time, if you just start chewing something like gum, your body's going to think that you ate, and then it's going to turn off the signals until it realizes like a couple hours later, oh shit, we don't actually have something. Fucking turn the signals back on and fucking red flare this time. And it's like, there's different stages of hunger signals and hunger pains where like your stomach hurting doesn't mean that you necessarily need to eat. That's like oftentimes a sign of like the stomach acids like being in the wrong place for whatever reason. So it's like, if your stomach hurts and it's because you ate too much earlier and now you're having acid reflux, people who've had acid reflux enough know what that's like, but sometimes people who haven't had it frequently enough may think that's like, oh, my stomach hurts, it's a hunger signal, and then they eat more and make it worse, and then they never actually get the proper conditioning to know that this type of stomach pain is not hunger so much as like you need to do something to make your stomach valve close and stop fucking pushing acid back up your esophagus. And it's like,
quit eating too much.
It's not always eating that causes it, but a lot of times it is. And it's like, You see it with the what's it called? The professional eaters. When you actually like watch what happens with them beyond their competitions, is like they constantly have acid reflux because their shit never, the signals get all fucked up, so that sometimes their stomachs aren't like getting the signal to close their fucking stomach valve. So like a lot of them end up getting like chronic acid reflux, and they just power through it because you can do shit so that the acid reflux doesn't end up burning your esophagus permanently. But they have so much invested in this idea of like, oh, I can consume 10,000 calories or whatever the fuck it is, that a lot of Americans also have, that they power through it and are like fine with the pain of overconsumption because of the gratification that comes with overconsumption. And that's where I'm like, I see it.
It seems like some kind of mental illness. That's like a weird pathology.
It's definitely a mental illness. And that's why you see it with like the bodybuilders and like the professional eaters. And like anytime people use something as an excuse to eat like 6,000 to 10,000 calories a day, because then you find people where you're like, no, you don't need to eat 6,000 calories a day to do that. It's like these people can, and they do, but they don't actually end up needing to in the way that it's being framed to encourage other people to overconsume. Because it's like, remember when they were like, oh, Michael Phelps, what was it, like 10,000, 13,000 calories a day, and he's like this and that. And then it's like, well, now you find out he was suicidal and his hormones are all over the place. And it's like, he was never stable. So that whole Michael Phelps like facade didn't do anything but make him completely chaotic as a human being. And when he tries to come down from that Michael Phelps pseudo pedestal, because the pedestal was never real, he was always like having problems. He was always having problems, even when he was at the height of his quote unquote success. So it's like,
and he had to completely hide the one thing that probably helped him calm down.
Right. Exactly. Like, even in that regard, even if that helped, he had to fucking run from that and then disavow it, probably making it worse.
Yeah.
So there's all these things about it where you're like, all of those things I don't know if he would have done it over if he had the chance to do it over, would he do it? I don't know. But it doesn't sound like it was worth it, in a way that the whole premise is that it's meant to be worth it. It's meant to be like, oh yeah, you're giving your all and you're dedicating all these hours to this thing because at the end it's going to be worth it. Well, now down the line, it doesn't appear to be worth it. It doesn't seem like from what I've seen from his existence and his seeming projection of regret, it doesn't seem like it was worth it. So this is where I mean, the whole notion behind overconsumption is that the overconsumption that is projected to be necessary to accomplish these things that are alongside the culture of overconsumption aren't actually worth it. And it's between the football players and the basketball players.
The Rock. To look like The Rock, you got to eat like that, but you also end up looking like The Rock. He's a big dude. There's got to be like doors that he can't fit through without turning sideways. cars that he just can't get in, restrooms that he just can't even use. The stalls aren't
think he's
big
not
enough.
taking painkillers and muscle
Oh,
relaxers?
I bet he's doing that like all the
You
time.
know?
I bet he takes muscle relaxer shakes. You know, after his workout, he gets that chia green blend, and then he like throws in some freaking muscle relaxers so his arms will stop shaking. And also, nobody on Earth can consume as many grams of carbohydrates as he does, because like I've seen his fucking pancake and waffle stacks. That's some unhuman levels of carbohydrates. And so to consume that much, you got to work out like he does, like performatively. That's the only place where that kind of calorie consumption can even exist. It's a performance. He's showing off. Look at how much I can eat, and then it makes me able to burn this much fucking calories lifting stuff. I wonder how many houses he's lifted in terms of just raw weight over time. I mean, how many? You know, I mean, like how much work could be translated to like houses.
Yeah, you know, and that I think a lot of weightlifters would translate into neighborhoods.
Yeah,
at least, if not, you know,
or like I think The Rock might have pushed an
cities.
entire community at this point.
Yeah.
Like it's the amount of work that goes into that. It's incredible, but it's also like he could have built a neighborhood or a community or a small town by now. You could have Rockville, Rockland, Roxburgh. Roxburgh sounds good. Dwaynesville sounds awesome.
Well, and it's like, even with The Rock, okay, I know he's got a ton of money and he's got his legacy. And it's like, I'm sure in the sense of what he's accomplished, he's definitely going to say it's worth it.
Oh, yeah. The Rock's
because
awesome.
he's got the money.
Yeah.
But there's like 1,000 other people who tried to do what The Rock did. Only one of maybe like 2 or 3 were as successful. Look at Terry Bollea, then you look at Roddy Piper, then you look at
John Cena,
Dwayne Johnson, and John Cena. There's a range. There's Dave Bautista. There's a range. The Rock is at the peak. Fucking
John
Roddy
Cena's
Piper.
pretty close to that peak too.
No, not even close. Not even close. In terms of like how many movies he's been in.
Oh no. He was in a Transformers movie though. That's pretty serious.
I mean, he's at the beginning of his career in terms of movies compared to The Rock.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that like 2 of those movies that The Rock has been in were actually like watchable for somebody with like any sort of prejudice about good movies. Like, you know, I've seen maybe one film with The Rock in it where I'm like, okay, this is a good movie.
Yeah, no, the roller coasters don't count. Roller coasters in kids' movies are...
And the roller coasters aren't... His acting's usually not good. It's not like... So this is where I'm like, this is all to say The Rock is at the peak end of the acting spectrum for professional wrestlers, in the sense of it wasn't always great and it's not always great, but he put in the time and effort, which is like, you look at Batista, it's like his isn't always great. Like he wasn't, you know, everybody recognizes his Guardians of the Galaxy and Blade Runner, but he's done other shit that was not good. He did like Man with the Iron Fist or some shit, the terrible RZA movie.
The terrible RZA
And
movie.
I think he was like Tong Po in the Kickboxer remake, not good. So there's some shit, but it's like you put in the time and effort. Like, I never saw that John Cena movie where he was with Amy Schumer. I doubt it was good. You know what I mean? I'm sure it wasn't bad, but John Cena and Peacemaker is like, you can tell he's putting in time and putting in effort in like his craft, but it takes time and effort. Like, so I'm not of the mind where like, I'm not trying to discount the time and effort it takes to go from like one craft to another. But if you look at Hulk Hogan's movies, they're fucking terrible. Hulk Hogan was a terrible actor beyond the WWE in a way where you're like, he never even got close to the level of The Rock or Batista or John Cena in terms of his actual acting chops. So like, even in The Rock's like not being the greatest actor, he still got better and did better than like most. Roddy Piper is probably the actual best. Well, I think Batista might end up taking it eventually, but at this point, I think Roddy Piper might be the best wrestler turned actor in terms of actual performances that we've seen. In terms of like, he carried They Live.
Right, I think Roddy Piper is the only one so far who has been able to give us a character performance that wasn't Roddy Piper on screen. Whereas it's almost impossible to dissociate The Rock from any of the roles that he portrays. And Dwayne, it's not that Dwayne Johnson doesn't try. It's just that The Rock is such a prominent aspect of his physique that it's just hard to dissociate those things. He might as well be wearing a Spider-Man suit. I can't not see The Rock. Whereas John Cena, it's easier to see him in roles that are not wrestling. And Dave Bautista, it's easier to see him in roles that aren't wrestling as well. But Roddy Piper, he was in quite a few movies where he wasn't Roddy Piper. So, well,
and even in up to like Always Sunny, it was like his character in Always Sunny is like, you know he's in there, but it's totally a character that he's doing where you're like, holy shit, this dude, for a second I thought this guy was him.
Yeah.
Like, he really was able to like trick a person into making them believe he's somebody else. Even if that somebody else resembles Roddy Piper, it's not Roddy Piper anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas like you're saying, it's like impossible to disconnect any of The Rock's characters from The Rock because The Rock was a character.
Yeah.
So I think that's also why it's like, yeah, Dwayne Johnson, I don't know who he is, but I know who The Rock is in terms of his character.
I think the thing about John Cena is that he's just John Cena. And
we assume.
But but that's the thing is that there wasn't this extra character layer. Like, I think that's part of what's different. There are a bunch of wrestlers who are like that that just use a name that seems like a normal name, that haven't taken on like an extra persona. I like the extra persona. I'm not gonna lie. Like, the Ultimate Warrior was a great personality for WWE in the ring. But that era of wrestling was different. They yelled at the camera when they were on the sidelines. They yelled at each other through the cameras. Do they even do that anymore? Are they? I mean, do they allow them to be all coked up on screen like that?
Oh, there's no way they're allowed to be that coked up. That was like
a golden era of television wrestling.
that was when Hulk Hogan got called the N-word. Harlem Heat, fucking Booker T called Hulk Hogan the N-word and shit. It's like that was a whole different time, man. So much more cocaine.
Oh man, they had guys with names like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. What?
Superfly Jimmy Snuka.
Superfly Jimmy Snuka. That's a great name. Mr. Perfect. Like, what?
Val Venus. With an I.
Oh. That was such a strange era for televised wrestling too, for the big show. It was such an extravagant show. I remember there was that brief period of time where Hulk Hogan had that feather boa. That stuff was great.
Yeah, Hollywood Hulk.
Yeah. That
was when the WCW actually gave a WWE a run for their money briefly. But then it like fizzled out because nobody wanted to see sick, like 50-year-old men wrestling.
I think the problem was that nobody could actually suspend disbelief and think that Ric Flair was still in enough shape to inflict trauma on anyone. Like when they start looking like a day old baked potato that's been buttered up, it's time to stop. There's like no amount of tanning or tanning juice that can make someone can overcome actually looking old. I guess maybe that was the fun of it, is that here's this old man that can beat the crap out of these young dudes. I didn't get that at the time. Maybe that's why it's interesting. Now I need to find out if Ric Flair ever beat The Rock.
I don't know if they were like active in the same league at the same time.
Nope, The Rock and Ric Flair had at it in a Raw of 2002 in July 29. It looks like The Rock puts Ric Flair in the figure 4.
Funny.
Yeah.
Of course. I feel like Ric Flair left for WCW not too long after that, though.
I think they all just kind of went back and forth depending on how mad or what kind of relationship they had with
I think once
Vince
they left,
McMahon at the time.
they would never come. Like, well, I don't know, because I feel like once they left, they didn't come back. Maybe I'm just misremembering. Because they did the like NWO thing.
Yeah.
And then they took it over to WCW Wolfpack, or it was like spreading between the two. And the it was weird because it was like you couldn't tell if the
in 2001 in 2001 WCW was purchased by WWF to the tune of $2.5 million.
Oh,
so at that point, like, they all became employees of Vince McMahon again, even if they did escape for a little while.
That's what happened.
And then they bought ECW 2 years later in 2003.
Okay, because
they basically
makes sense.
Vince just bought everything up as he could and consolidated it all, and that's a smart dude. He was a really good like foil too, like because he could just become the villain at any moment. Like, and then there was that brief period of time where like would get called out. He'd show up and beat the crap out of somebody, then walk off the stage to a chorus of boos. I always thought that was great. That was probably my favorite era of WWE. When McMahon would just come out and remind everyone who he is. Occasionally he got the snot beat out of him, but that's also part of the big show too. They've got to show him taking his licks. Otherwise, it's like there's no tension if he can always just beat everyone up.
Well, whenever Ken Shamrock went into the WWE, or I think it was still WWF at the time.
Yeah,
is when I started getting interested in like pit fighting and fucking. At the time, like they had the strongman fight, or what was it? Butterbean was part of. I think it was. Oh, tough man contest. Yeah, they had like it was non-traditional fighting, and where it would be like the tough man contest was open weight boxing, and they had like the pit fighting stuff where it would be mixed martial arts, but like no holds barred or no real rules and shit like that. But also like ECW at the time was closer to that and more like Japanese wrestling, where they were doing like exploding ring matches and barbed wire matches and shit like that, where it's like it wasn't that it was real, like, but the kayfabe was a lot more bloody, and the stuff they were doing looked a lot more violent in terms of it would be like the rated R version of WWF, whereas if WWF was like PG, which it turned into like PG-13 later on once they started acquiring the ECW and other organizations, and they started doing like much more sexual storylines that were like the outside of the ring, where it would be like people stealing each other's wives and shit like that as the impetus for the
the rivalries. So it looks like back in July of last year, he was ousted as the CEO of WWE by the then board.
Sexual.
But then his daughter stepped down, and then some other guy was appointed CEO. But then the face of like the board changed, and then they voted to put him back in like 5 months later. So as of 2 days ago, he's back in the driver's seat.
Well, but there's like the possibility that this action is going to end up causing a lot of problems. So,
I'm sure it will, but it's kind of funny.
Well, because he got taken out because of a sexual harassment lawsuit.
Yeah, they're like, well, it got much worse after we got rid of him, so we want him back. It's like, really?
Well, the issue is like AEW has been picking up steam. So I think that's where, like,
holy crap.
AEW had been on the upswing while WWE was on the downswing.
The stock went from $72 a share on January 5. And then the day he announced that he was going to return to WWE, and it jumped up to $89.
That sounds like a pump and dump.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like a pump and dump.
I can't believe they have private shares in that company. That's really crazy. I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Wow. Yeah, it looks like he's got 38% of the company, but controls 81% of the vote. Not too shabby, Vince. Not too shabby.
Yeah, the fact that the AEW merger is even a possibility is like a sign of the times, though, for WWE. Because,
yeah,
the whole reason they acquired WCW, or at the time it seemed like, was because WCW had created a viable competitor, but at the time both of them were becoming less popular, so it was like in the WCW and the WWE's best interest for them to merge for the sake of like concentrating talent. But then they split it between Monday and Thursday night, and it was like the rosters that would compete on Monday night would not compete against the Thursday night rosters. And it was like they were trying to create a division within the WWE, and it was just like too arbitrary, I think, for a lot of people, where it was like you could tell it's contrived because they're writing it into the storyline. It was like Monday Night Raw versus Thursday Night Live, or I don't know what the names of the shows were off the top of my head, but it became this whole thing.
Wasn't it like Monday Nitro for WCW?
Yeah, WCW, but this was after the merger.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm saying, it's within the WWE. Like I don't remember exact details because I wasn't watching. Like I had stopped watching by then, but I remember seeing it happen and being like confused what they're trying to do as like a tertiary observer, but like the people who were still in it and still watching were even like getting over it because it was so. It's like if you're a UFC fan and the UFC suddenly decides like, oh, everybody that fights on pay-per-view cards is not going to fight against the people who fight on the ESPN cards, and those two leagues, now we're going to make like two separate leagues but within the same league. And it's like, wait, what? Especially when the WWE was fake. So it's like trying to add these layers of arbitrary league structure into something that was already like, it takes a layer suspension of disbelief to be a part of it anyway. I think it was like too much.
Yeah, that's generally how wrestling ends for most people, I think. Just it requires. I can suspend my disbelief pretty far. I enjoy superhero movies and cartoons, but I enjoy over the top like John Carpenter horror movies. Like I think Alien's great, but there's a point where it's just too over the top. I guess it's difficult, that kind of live stage acting that we're viewing through a camera. Like, it's not like it's a soap opera with a really abstracted set. They're not arguing in the living room. They're arguing in a ring in the center of an auditorium or a arena, and they bring their home life problems into work with them. It's the weirdest soap opera, and they're so like everything's so in the moment that it's hard to take. It is hard to take seriously because, I mean, unless everyone's all coked up and on steroids and they have no impulse control.
Well, but okay, so here's the place where that becomes a problem. So, like, I don't know if you remember when Owen Hart died.
Yeah.
Like, people thought it was fake.
No, he died.
Because, well, of course, but I mean, when it happened,
yeah,
everybody thought that it was part of the show, and it was like, I want to say a good month before people realized that this dude's not coming back. Like, this wasn't a show, like, or this wasn't part of the show. Like, dude actually died in front of everybody. And it's like, once people realized that happened, then I think that's when it was like a shock to the audience that bad things can actually happen. Because, okay, so this is another issue. Say somebody is like doing some high risk maneuver and they actually break their neck or they actually break their back. Well, when you start writing that into the fucking storyline, people think it's fake, or people think that shit's fake in terms of like, oh, this must just be them trying to hype it up or whatever. And then, especially when they start having the storylines where somebody's in the hospital and then they get attacked by another wrestler, it's like, well, then of course all that shit must be fake. And then Owen Hart dies, and suddenly that crowd has no idea what to think about any of the things that they're watching. So I think it's like shit like that, or when Eddie Guerrero had a heart attack, or when Brian Pillman had a heart attack. I think it's like, because of the nature of wrestling, people won't believe that shit's real for like the first couple weeks or the first month. Or conversely, there was like a rumor that Ultimate Warrior had died and gotten replaced, and like whenever he came back, because he had clearly gone off his roid cycle and his muscles were small, so he had to wear a muscle suit. And it's like, because of the nature of wrestling, then the rumor mill turned that into, oh, the Ultimate Warrior's dead and they replaced him. And it's like, when you actively disrupt someone's capacity to tell what's real and what's not, when reality hits, they're not equipped to discern. So that's where I see like a lot of the people who are like able to reject, not only able to reject reality, but ready and basically primed to reject reality, is because a lot of the stuff they're raised on has blurred the lines. Like reality TV, one of those things. But especially professional wrestling in America, because of people like Vince McMahon, who were willing to push the envelope and blur the lines. Like when couples would be getting divorces, well, let's write that into the fucking plot line. It's like, oh, Macho Man Randy said and Miss Elizabeth getting a divorce, let's write that into the plot line. So it sets up this whole audience in a way that they aren't even, it's not only are they not aware they are actively throwing away their capacity to be aware of this distinction because they want entertainment. And I think it's in that light of like when people.
Do you remember the British Bulldog?
Oh yeah, when he died,
he was married to Bret and Owen Hart's sister. Yeah, apparently when he died, he was visiting his girlfriend, who was Bruce Hart, the other brother's estranged wife. so that maybe that stuff that was going on screen when they were during the extra coked up era was actually real.
That's what I'm saying. It was like, it really was. But they wrote it in terms of like, they would write these scenarios and then have part of them play out. So like, there was another one where like, Big Boss Man turned up at somebody's funeral or something that was like, it was like partially real, where you're like, this was somebody's actual funeral and they filmed it, but only one side was privy. So it became like this huge contentious point where it was like, the reactions you saw were real because one side was not made aware, but because it was then used for television, then it's like, well, was it scripted or not? Well, kind of. And it's like, this is where that blending of reality started to get really dangerous, because that's what I mean. Like, on the one hand, it was real. It was like the funeral of the Big Show's father. That's what it was. Yeah. And it's like, it was like, at the time, the Big Show's dad wasn't actually dead, and they did this whole thing to make it seem like the dude showing up at the funeral was like, what's it called? Candid. But then it came out, but then they had to like adjust the story or something. So it was like, once you cross a certain line and then the audience is like, hey, is this fake or not? They have to retroactively adjust to make it seem like they didn't cross the line. But that's where it was like, because they did too many of those, like, because then one of them was like with some dude slapping somebody else's wife, or it was like they would do these weird, what appeared to be real, but because it was being shown in the context of their show, it's like, you're supposed to understand as the audience that this is part of the show, but because the audience had then been so exposed to things that they did not know if it were real or not, then that's when it starts to become like detrimental to the audience's capacity to tell reality from constructed fiction. And that's when it was like, some of the audience left because they didn't appreciate the constant imposition of out-of-ring storylines that were then made to be real, but also overlapping with reality. But this is also where like a lot of the cocaine-fueled stuff started to go out of vogue. And it's like, what is it, like 96 to 2001 is when they started to like dial down the cocaine-fueled storylines.
Yep.
And it's like anything after, well, not to say that it completely went away, but it got to the point where it was so out of control in terms of like, this storyline is nothing to do with a ring match. It's about somebody grabbing somebody's wife's ass, and then they got into a fight at the buffet, or they would like take it so far out of the ring that then it became this like, it's beyond a soap opera at that point. It's like a
melodrama.
It's like spin-offs of spin-offs and spin-offs. Like in terms of the main story arc was supposed to be about the championship belt and the rise to the championship belt. Now we're like in people's personal lives and like funerals and shit. Like, you know, it's like it gets so far from the original intention necessarily because the audience they have sort of like catered to at this point, they keep increasing the need to up the stakes. So at that point, it's like this audience can only have the stakes increase so much until we're far beyond the actual original reason for being here in terms of the wrestling. Like, do you remember Mick Foley?
Oh yeah, he wore that mask and had that sock.
Yeah, he's like the perfect example of they had to keep increasing the antics in terms of like Mick Foley was like a gross character that would like violate people with that sock. And like it was like that it got so to the point where you're like, is this has gotta be a bit, right? He's not really like this. But anybody who had like known Mick Foley throughout his career, it was like so obvious. But if you were like a 9-year-old kid and Mankind is the first time you're seeing this person, and Mick Foley never breaks character when he's doing the Mankind bit, and you see this, a lot of those kids thought that shit was real. So it's like when you have this person doing what's a bit that's clear to certain people, but looks real to other people, it starts to create this gap in this perception gap where it's like the same people who I won't say Easter Bunny because I can't really think of, has anybody ever actually thought the Easter Bunny was real? But like some people actually thought Santa was real at some point. So like there's certain things where you hear it as a kid, and there's some people who will like never ever believe it no matter what age. Like some 5-year-olds, you'll tell them about Santa and they're like, fucking bullshit, you know? Like no fucking way, whatever. They might entertain it for like a second and then they think about it and like, you know what, that's no. But then some like 13-year-olds, you tell them about Santa and they're like, okay, cool, awesome, this makes sense. And it's not necessarily intelligence that is going to be the thing that distinguishes one from the other. But I think a lot of it has to do with how that person is presented reality versus scripted and constructed realities that can appear to be real because on the one hand, everything taking place is taking place, but it was constructed. And I think that's where like when somebody flies off the top rope and does an elbow, that actually happened. It's not that you didn't see somebody jump off the top rope and hit them in the face with their elbow. It's the way that they did it doesn't actually translate into the pain that the visual impact implies, and if you're not able to discern choreography versus real world chaos, that person can be easily tricked into thinking a choreographed event is real world chaos. And that's where I think it's like the Will Smith slap. Like, it never looked real to me. It never looked like real world chaos. It always looked choreographed or at least constructed. Not one time have I ever looked at that video and thought, this is real. After years and years of watching mixed martial arts and watching like boxing and watching kickboxing and watching, professional wrestling and watching movies, at no point in any time did I see that slap and think, oh, this is real. Not one fucking time. But there's millions of people out there in America that not only the first time they saw it, but still now they look at that and think, oh, this is real violence. Like, not only is that not real violence, I don't even think it's a real slap, let alone like somebody who's throwing a slap with an actual violent intention.
Yeah,
So
man,
it's like
the few times that I've actually seen people get into fights, it wasn't just a slap. Like, it was never just a slap. Holy crap.
even to say that it's not, if you're like really angry to the point where you want to strike somebody and there's people watching and there's cameras, but you can't control it, that person can't control it.
Yeah.
Will Smith controlled his slap. So that's where, like, to me, those two things are incongruous to the point where somebody who can't control their temper also is not going to be able to control their strike. He controlled the strike way too much for someone who trained to be an imitation of a heavyweight boxing champion of the world. And then if you like go look at actual slaps, like the slaps that get delivered by somebody who's like over 200 pounds, even to other people who are over 200 pounds, are like knockout level strikes because of the mass and the momentum that come behind those. It's like, more often than not, a person who receives one of those strikes from somebody at that, even when we start to get to like 170, those people can deliver slaps that are single strike knockout level. Chris Rock appeared to be phased, but at no point did he look like he was about to like get knocked out. Anybody who's listening, just go watch some slap fights. Like,
yeah,
on
man.
YouTube, just go watch them. People get knocked the fuck out to the point where they need medical attention just from one slap. And especially when we're talking about big people, like Will Smith is over 200 pounds. Dude is like 6'2", always in shape. He's definitely over 200 pounds, if not like 220 on a hydrated day. Dude is not small. We're not talking about a small person. So when I see that as somebody who understands physics and understands martial arts, I don't see a real slap. When you have people who've been raised, like I said, not knowing if what they're shown is real, like the same people who thought Eminem getting Howard Stern's face in Howard Stern's ass in Eminem's face was real, I feel like are the ones who thought the Will Smith slap was real. But this is also like, again, the people who don't know where the line starts and ends with wrestling. Because then, okay, not to keep going on about wrestling, but there's shit like Bill Goldberg was a wrestler that everybody hated because he didn't know how to wrestle. And what this translates into is he ended Bret Hart's career because he actually kicked him. Let me say that again. He ended a person's career because he actually kicked him. Now, when we're talking about wrestling or professional wrestling, getting kicked doesn't sound like that big of a deal. But in terms of when you're supposed to not actually be kicking people, not actually hitting them as hard as you possibly can and making it into a choreographed event that appears to be kicking, when you actually kick somebody in the head, that can be career-ending shit. And it's like, this is one of those, I guess, like, in terms of how people understand professional wrestling and how things played out, it sounds like not that big of a deal. But when you like look at what this one person in Bill Goldberg did to the earning potential and the legacy of another person in terms of destroying all that, it's like, it's a wonder that the fans are still watching, in that it's there's no guarantees of success, but the way that most of these professional wrestlers end up with like the most tragic end to their career trajectory, it's like you almost don't want to do something that would encourage somebody to follow down this path anymore. It's like this gets back to the whole notion of like, for every single Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, there's like 1,000, if not more, complete failed, broken people that have nowhere near as much money to make it worth what they went through. In terms of like, that's where I'm like, I think The Rock would say it was worth it at this point. He may not. And that's only because he's not, he may be truthful about it, but I would assume he's not truthful about the physical and mental pain that he's constantly in from what he had to go through early on. And that's where I'm like, only recently did these people start being honest about that shit. And that's why I think the notion of the glamour that was associated with it is like really quickly fading. Like, you know, Ric Flair, I guess, you know, he had sex with a lot of women. I'm sure he got a lot of diseases then. So it's like, is that something we as society like are still looking up to in terms of like, I don't think so. Like, but if Ric Flair's the benefit from his wrestling career was like a bunch of STDs and memories, was that worth it? Maybe. But this is not to say that like these pursuits are empty. It's more so
there are 17,600 independent wrestlers registered in the world right now.
Right now.
On cagematch.net. No, that's low. I mean, sorry, that was in 2016. So as of 2016, there were at least 17,000 wrestlers that were registered. It's probably at least 20,000 now. So The Rock is like 1 out of 20,000. Not even like, it's like less. It's way less than a percentile.
Yeah, of the people who want to get like, because obviously The Rock didn't get into wrestling to stay in wrestling.
No,
it's you know, that's not
this is totally the end game. I'm gonna do a bunch of coke and yell.
Yeah, so it's like, it's not meant to be their retirement point. It's meant to be a starting point.
Yeah, it's a springboard.
Most of these people, I'm assuming, because even like what is it, like Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross, it's like they were wrestlers at one time, but you don't want to be the fucking 60-year-old man who's still trying to compete against the 23-year-old wrestler or whatever, in terms of like, yeah, that's a great story, the old man beating the young guy, but everybody then knows it's a work. So how much do you want to be the old guy known for worked shows? Like, nobody wants to be that person. So I think in the sense of like, there are these career trajectories within these. Well, that's like that Mickey Rourke movie, The Wrestler. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a happy movie, right?
No.
So it's like that's not like the end point for this career trajectory, because it's so detrimental on the body early on, that I'm like, knowing the goal, like somebody who's doing backyard wrestling isn't trying to be a professional wrestler, so necessarily, and that's where that if somebody's doing it for the love of wrestling and the love of pro wrestling, that person is not who I'm talking about in terms of like, again, The Rock's father was a professional wrestler. The Rock ended his career is not over. He didn't follow his father's path into professional wrestling to stay there. And that's where I think a lot of the success that Vince McMahon has exuded has confused people in the terms of like, if Hulk Hogan had stayed in that position the entire time and didn't try out Hollywood, like, I would think that it was more valuable to him than it seems, because he tried to get away from it. Same thing with Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar tried to get away from it. A lot of people, John Cena he successfully got away from it. Batista successfully got away from it.
Yeah, that's why I think that they're like, I mean, they're in that like, you know, less than a percentile group with The Rock having successfully navigated out of professional wrestling and into a position where they are, you know, the headliner, the top billed actor in big movies. Like, that's actually quite impressive. It's really impressive.
It really is.
It's totally fucking impressive.
Which is also, I didn't want to take anything away from The Rock in terms of like,
we love The Rock.
You know, you got to have all those bad movies to get to where he is now, and put in that work in terms of like, it wouldn't be fair if he was just automatically good at acting. Like, this dude's what, 6'4", all the muscle in the world, fucking successful wrestling career. That shit wouldn't be fair if he was like just good at acting too. So like, I'm glad life is not like, if he could sing and he could like dance and all this shit. It's like, no, The Rock can't dance. Like, at least like he doesn't have the, you know, he doesn't have all the talents. So life is at least fair in some ways. Like, it like gave him some, but held on others. But he put in the work to compensate for that.
You know, there is a video of him in high school doing a really sick, nasty robot. I'm serious. It's like actually pretty good. It's one of those things like, motherfucker, really? But you know, that's what happens when you grow up in the 80s. You're good at stuff like that.
But that was also before he was like
big and muscly,
fucking gigantic person. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, man. There's something about it. The guy, I bet he can still do a really nasty robot if he wanted to. I bet he has like such like serious like isolated muscle group control. I bet he could do a really nasty movie.
I sincerely, and the only reason I doubt it is because his choreography has not changed in terms of like
his fight, the big guy fight style. Yeah,
he's got like 3 moves. One of them is the rock boot, and then the slam,
and the big swinging fist, the haymaker.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I'm like, considering his range of motion and his fight choreography,
he has the same moves as Agent Smith.
Because this is where fighting is dancing, and I look at The Rock's fighting and I do not see a dancer. Like, you look at Jackie Chan's fighting, Jackie Chan's gonna go fucking cut a rug, like bust all kinds of moves just based on the fact of him being able to move and fight choreography like that. Or like, we all know the Jean-Claude Van Damme, come on. Everybody knows that shit. I mean, Dude can move his hips. Everybody knows that.
Like, he studied ballet.
We've all seen it. Come on.
Yeah, he can
so
gyrate.
It's like, but that's also why he can fucking throw those kicks like that. So there's this like intrinsic tie of dancing and fighting in terms of how people move, which is also why when people see like capoeira being performed, they can't help but see dance. Like in the sense of, yeah, it looks like a dance. It kind of is, but it's kind of not. So I really think you can tell a lot about one person's fight or dance, whichever one, vice versa, by looking at the other. And that's where I'm like, what's the name? Like, I think Michael Chandler, there's like video of him fucking, I think it's him doing all kinds of dances where you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes fucking perfect sense. Like, this dude does like backflips off the octagon and shit. Yeah, of course he can do these like fucking, or Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson dances in the octagon. Like his like, anytime he wins, it's like all kinds of breakdancing moves that the regular person can't do. And it's like the fact that he can do those things, it's
after
like,
fighting.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, exactly. After fighting, it makes perfect sense that he can fight the way he does when he's fighting, because he's like agile and fluid and mobile in a way that the average person is not ever going to be able to be. Like, the average person is never going to be able to do air flares or like the worm or fucking. It's not just because they're not physically capable. It's because they're not going to put in the time.
Oh yeah. Well, when I think of the worm, I think of the version of it that I saw at. It was a clip from like some breakdancing competition. And this dude's doing this locking routine, and he straight up jumps and then dives into the ground and does the worm like 2 times, and then stands right up and goes back into his locking routine like it just happens like right on beat, and it was amazing. And so whenever I see somebody just casually doing the worm, I'm reminded that there is like for a person to having seen somebody do that and who has clearly mastered the complete execution from like at full speed dancing, not just like setting up for it and doing it like passively, but actually like mid dance, that's like a sight to behold. It's not just something that like people do because it's cool. It's like truly a sight to behold.
And I bet that person's really good at jiu-jitsu too.
Dude, I bet that person is like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu. They do all of them because, yeah. But that's one of those weird techniques like that.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.